Good morning. Thank you for joining us again for the Seubert Webinar series. Today we're talking about a very important topic, employee certifications and qualifications. Should we have them on site? Are they supposed to be there? And how does that play into managing OSHA compliance? And more importantly, the ongoing liability that every employer has to manage. Today, I'm fortunate to be joined by Pat Stewart from TMX Compliance, a longtime partner of Seubert Associates, and an expert in employee qualification and managing that tracking system.
Morning, Joe.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So we want to jump in today and dig in on probably one of the largest issues that every employer has to deal with, and that's how do we know when our employees are qualified? OSHA puts that back on the employer to say, you deem qualification, but many people chase that. They think just because they've had a certification one point in time in their life, or because they worked for me in the past and they should know what to do. We find that there is a huge gap in what employers actually believe their employees are qualified to be doing and what they're legally allowed to be doing. Pat, do you see this happening across one industry in particular? Construction, we talk about contractors a lot, but this is a universal issue.
It is a universal issue, Joe, and we do see it across many industries. Our company started actually in the construction industry and in higher education, believe it or not, because in the higher education world, there's been a lot of requirements to track teachers' credentials and profiles, background checks, fingerprinting, all of that. But in the construction industry, it is really growing rapidly with all of the OSHA enhancements and all the different changes that have been made in the last 10 years with regulations around compliance and that. So yes, it's pretty much industry-wide, but construction, trucking, those are the big industries right now.
Sure, and I can see how this plays out across multiple industries, because whether it's an OSHA requirement, whether it's a customer requirement to even be on site, there's things that we have to do, hoops we have to jump through in order to comply with, being allowed to do the work. But when we really boil that down, it's more than just employee training. It's a ticket to work. It's your pay to play. Should you even be here? And if we aren't managing those employees that are supposed to be allowed to be on site, that we can verify are qualified, capable, and competent to do the work, we're guessing. Right?
Correct. We are guessing. And if you look at, I'll take one segment of construction, electrical contractors. If you look at electrical contractors, they have to track a lot of different types of items. First of all, just start with their employees. Their employees have to have certain certifications, journeyman, whatever their qualifications are. And electricians are really unique because a lot of states don't have a state mandate about their licensing. A lot of times it comes down to counties and regions, so it's very difficult. So if you're an electrical contractor in Pennsylvania, you're going to be very familiar with the Pennsylvania contracting requirements, but if you journey into Ohio, West Virginia, Maryland, they're all different. So all the different types of certifications that an employee would need are going to be different in Ohio. They're going to be different in Maryland. So you have to understand it and you have to track that differently. So it's very complex. And then electrical contractors, they also carry equipment with them. If you think about that, They have gloves, they have meters, they have various things that need to be inspected. And every day they're out on their sites with this equipment and they don't know if it's expired or not. So there's a lot of different things when you think about just a subset of electrical contractors they have to worry about when they're on job sites.
And this phantom issue of, is it expired or not? Am I qualified or not? It really comes down to a single date on a calendar when that training expires. So whether it's 1 year or 3 years or a lifetime certification, these things have to be managed. And what I find that a lot of employers struggle with is they'll say, we did training in January, so we're good until next January. But if you did training on January 3rd, you're not good until January 31st of the next year. You're good until
Right.
January 3rd of that consecutive year. It's a 365-day requirement. So I think whenever we really boil down some of the issues that contractors faces, it gets granular. You've got to be tracking down to the day in order to sidestep liability should something go wrong, and OSHA compliance, which is oftentimes that report card for contractors as they look to do more work and grow in the business.
It really does come down to the day, and it really comes down to also having the right advance notification of when that day is coming. During COVID over the last 18 months, for instance, welders had a very difficult time getting to welding centers to be recertified. So it didn't do any good to notify somebody 2 weeks before their welding certification was expiring because it was taking 2 and 3 months to schedule a time slot to be able to go on site. So we've got the capability to adjust all the different types of compliance items in the notifications because some classes are very easy to get into, some are very difficult. So it's critical to understand how much warning you need to give your employees and also to appropriately plan it out. You and I have talked many times about having 24-hour notice to train somebody is not training.
Mm-hmm.
That's slapping something together to make sure somebody can go out to a job site. If you've got a month notice, now you can develop a real training program for them and really make sure they understand what they're doing on the job site. So notifications in that one day can make a difference between being compliant or not.
And when you really, kind of look at how do we prevent something bad from happening, time, planning, those are all really valuable aspects of it. But many employers wait till that last minute and go, oh, I'm sending Joe out to the job and he's not ready to go.
Right.
What do I do? And they roll the dice. Now, naturally, there's some times where you just can't even get on the site because you're not qualified, and there's a badge that would tell you, hey, you can't be on site. But too many times these situations end up in a position where a claim happens, a major event occurs, an employee gets injured, and now we're coming back and you're being scrutinized. And not just scrutinized, we're talking grand inquisition on why didn't you train these people? Why didn't you have enough lead time? And unfortunately, we never get a pass. OSHA, lawyers, society, they never go, we knew you were busy. We'll give you a break on complying. The expectation is you are buttoned up 100%, and the people that are working are legitimately supposed to be there.
I can tell you, Joe, from knowing and not knowing if someone's been properly trained can be the difference of millions of dollars when something goes wrong. We had a client that sadly had one of their subcontractors' employees get injured on the job, an electrician, and they had done various different types of safety awareness training on that site throughout about a 2-month project. And unfortunately, that employee was injured, there was a fire, there was damage, and of course what followed was a lawsuit. And during the due diligence in that, it was claimed that that person wasn't trained on the right safety procedures of the job site. By having that data in our system and knowing that they were trained really helped that contractor defend themselves to say, no, we did properly train them. An accident in this case really did happen. They were properly trained, but it really helped mitigate their liability and their exposure by having that information.
And that's such an important aspect of any contractor or any employer's life cycle is you have to maintain good relations with your customers. You have to have good public image that you're doing the right things. Now, Pat, I had a situation where it was on the opposite side. As a safety director, as someone who's managing risk in the field, I have an active construction project. We need people from the hall to come out and do the work because whether manpower was fluctuating due to other demands in the area or we just simply didn't have enough workers, they call the hall. You expect a qualified person to come out because that's what they are. They're ready to go. The labor hall has said that they're ready to go. But the obligation is still on the employer now to make sure that they're trained up for the tasks that they're doing, on that project, what they're expected to do. And unfortunately, the situation I dealt with was it was a piece of equipment that an employee should have been able to use. And everyone kept saying, it's foolproof, it's idiot-proof. Well, we know nothing is foolproof or idiot-proof. There's always a way or a will that someone's going to challenge that. But at the end of the day, it was a piece of equipment that was supposed to be able to operate without error. If it cycled and compressed the pipe, we were good to go. It wasn't supposed to have an issue. But there's employee training that needs to go along with that. An employee came out, they said, yeah, I know how to use the piece of equipment. We gave it the sniff test, they held it, they looked like they knew what they were doing, and sure enough, they proceeded. And the prep work to cut that pipe to get it in the right position so they could use that machine and equipment as intended didn't go the right way. The quality was off, the employee had never been trained, and fast forward 2-3 weeks, they pressurized the system, there's water in the lines, the tenant is about to take occupancy of the building, there was a robotic process in there. It was a very, very expensive project. And the night before they're going to take occupancy, that pipe ruptured at the connection, it broke, and it dumped water out of a 4-inch main for a few hours before anyone could go. It was a $4.5 million claim. And as the contractor, we were blacklisted for 3 years. Huge black eye in the industry. And it shined a light on the fact that we were operating without any real guidelines on employee qualification. It was, oh, you came from the hall, you're qualified by their means, you're qualified by ours. And I had another situation where it was a little more tragic in the situation that they relied on the fact that an employee had an OSHA 10-hour card. And everyone kept saying, but they have an OSHA 10-hour card, they're qualified, they're certified to do the work. And at the end of the day, the employee, there was a fatality, and OSHA made it very clear that even though that's our certification, that doesn't guarantee qualification. The employer is responsible. So the 10-hour covered fall protection, it covered chemical exposure, it covered soup to nuts what a contractor would need to know to do work on a construction site safely. But the obligation was still that we had to train them on fall protection specific to the tasks that they were doing. And everyone hung their hat on the fact that the employee didn't work for us that long. What more could we have done? And there was a lot more that we could have done. And when I sit here and think about TMX in retrospect, now as someone 20 years in the industry and looking back at what I was doing a decade ago, Pat, there is countless fatalities, countless insurance claims, countless negative reputation, incidents that could have been prevented by this. And how simple, red, yellow, green, good to go or stop. Tell us more about how TMX is really driving that change for contractors or employers in general for the transparency that's needed to stop something ahead of time.
I think when you look at how TMX has approached this, I, like you, went through my own type of life lesson, back in, I'm a lot older than you now, Joe, but back in 1981 I was co-oping for a company called Weirton Steel down in Weirton, West Virginia, and I had the honor of being part of commissioning a brand new $250 million mill. And fast forward 13 years later, it's 1994, I'm now an employee and officer of the company, and we're sitting in a conference room and all of our pagers went off, and what we found was that $250 million mill was burning to the ground. And not only did it burn to the ground, we had a loss of life, we had 13 other employees injured in the fire. It was catastrophic. And as we look back and looked at what had happened, it was basically a lack of processes, a lack of training. We had all of our labor, our union labor, basically working on our capital projects, and we needed to get maintenance done, so we brought in outside contractors. And to your point, Joe, we did not do the right safety awareness training for that specific location. And these poor welders were 60 feet in the air on a platform, and below them was 13,000 gallons of flammable fluid. The sparks went down into one of the trays, caught the tray on fire, and within 45 minutes, a $250 million facility burnt to the ground.
Oh my God.
And it cost life. And being an officer in a company, that's a difficult thing to accept, that you're part of the leadership team of a company that allowed someone to die on your watch. That was humbling. That was 1994. Fast forward to 2021. We're still here. 27 years later, we're still trying to get this right. So to your point, what we tried to do was to create an application that is very simple and empowers several things. The first thing it does is it empowers the employee to know about their qualifications. Because right now it's so easy for someone to say, I didn't remember. Mm-hmm. Think about our own things in our lives you don't remember, your car inspections, things like that. Why do you think Pennsylvania sends us our driver's license renewal cards, right? 3 months in advance, so we have timing to do it. So really it's the employee not knowing what they have. I mean, think about electrical contractors, welders. Some of these people have 20, 30, 40 different compliance items that they're tracking. Mm-hmm. There's no way they're going to know this. So the first thing that the TMX platform does is empower that employee to know. So on their phone, on their computer, whatever device they can access a browser, they're going to get notifications. First of all, we text them, we email them. You don't even have to have an email address to be able for an employee to log into our platform. They can use their cell phone number as an easy way to get into the platform and to access it. So it's key that the first thing is you have to empower the employee to know. The second thing that you need to be able to do is to be able to manage these employees by various different types of groups. You could have an employee that's out on 3 different job sites. And if you think about it, what really happens a lot of times is that they're on job site A and they're qualified. Mm-hmm. They have all the site safety trainings, they have all their credentials, they're done. They go to job site B, and to your point, your example, it's different. Do they have the right trainings on job site B? And then they go to job site C, do they have the right trainings there? Our system allows you to manage that same person across many groups. So on job site A, the site manager, project manager, admin, whoever's watching it, knows that that employee is fine, they're ready to go. But when that employee shows up on job site B, that team now knows that they're not ready to be employed. They're not ready to work that day because they're missing these type of training. So we really empower the various different types of groups to be able to understand how that employee fits into their working procedures. The other powerful thing the solution has is that, to your point about bringing people out of a union hall or bringing resources in from other locations, you can enable and disable those people on our platform. So if you have 30 guys that you brought in from a union hall and you worked for them for 3 months, and then they left, they're going to come back again in 2 months, you just disable them. But when they come back, you enable them, and now you can clearly see where they left off with their compliance items. So you don't have to start over. How many employees retrain their people over and over again because they had no idea what they trained them on already. That costs
Absolutely.
tens of thousands of dollars at times in wasted training, whereas you should have been training them on the right things, not on things they didn't need to repeat again. So that's the second thing. And the last thing I think one of the more important things about the platform is it really allows everybody to have real-time information, right? So to that point of that day means everything. So you can set the platform up. You don't even have to log into the platform. It can email you, it can text you every day to be able to understand what's going on in your population. So there's no excuse that you don't know. The employee, the manager, the admin, the site manager, the safety director, it's true transparency across your whole organization. It's completely flexible. How do you want to set that transparency up? So now you've empowered your employees, you've set up these work teams, and now the teams know what's going on, and now everybody has the transparent information. That's how we've been able to do it over the last 10 years by modifying this platform and gaining incredible insight from our clients. Our clients have driven the requirements of the platform. I mean, we learn more from talking to our clients every day than we do ourselves, just thinking about the problem.
And it's this convergence of issues too, because you have compliance-driven requirements, you have contractually driven requirements, you have site-specific driven requirements based on this, and it's a challenge to manage.
Mm-hmm.
And the empowerment part from the employee standpoint is what I think is a big difference on the platform, because there's been too many times in history where an employee goes, well, I didn't know, or I was told I was okay, and where they do challenge the status quo and say, I don't feel comfortable, or I'm not ready to do that. This gives them that transparency to say, I'm out of compliance.
Right.
I'm red. Why are you pushing me into this position? And too many times we find that an employee doesn't have that leg underneath them to stand up and say, I'm out of compliance. They don't remember when they got trained. It's their employer who's providing the content, all the information. This becomes a real strong accountability tool to be able for them to be able to say, I'm not qualified to do the work right now.
Mm-hmm.
I can be tomorrow. I can be once I do this, but until then, I'm not comfortable to do the work.
Well, think about your union hall worker that you were just mentioning. There's no way they're going to remember what they were trained for on a project maybe at Carnegie Mellon, and a project at the Hot Metal Bridge, and a project in another location. They're never going to remember
Mm-hmm.
that. You have to have the intelligence of a software platform like this to be able to remember that, and also make sure that is it time to renew that training again. Because many times, to your point about your OSHA 10, it is very site specific,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what a lot of employers miss. Is that you need very specific trainings at very specific locations to truly make sure your workers are safe. And you keep mentioning also the color red, green, and yellow. That's the simplicity of our platform. When an employee logs in, if they see something in red, it's pretty obvious, right? You're out of compliance. If they see something in yellow, that's a warning. It could be a 2-week warning, it could be a 6-week warning. They'll know exactly what the warning and know what they have to do. And if you're green, you're good to go. And again, you shouldn't even have to log into the platform if you're an employee unless you get a notification that you're coming up or something's expiring. And we even have what we call harassment mode in the platform. So the week before you're expiring, you can turn it on that you're literally texting and emailing that person every day. So there is absolutely no excuse that they don't know that they're expiring. So when they show up that Monday morning, a week later, and say, I'm here, and you say, no, you're going home. You've known now for a week that this was coming up, you're still out of compliance, I can't have you on the job site safely.
So I mean, this checks on so many boxes beyond compliance, because this affects work productivity, right? Our people are ready to do the work when we're expecting them to do the work because we have line of sight, but also it ensures that, we're looking at the tasks that people are doing and really assessing qualification there, because we use the term electrician or steam fitter or plumber or nurse or any range of occupation, but it's really the tasks that they're doing that day that bring into question, are they qualified or trained to do those things? So when an employer has a system like this, I imagine if I was still in the field managing risk, I'm going to look at all my people and I'm going to build out occupations, maybe groups you would call those, and say,
Right.
all right, these are my electricians, these are this, and then I'm going to really get into a more expanded risk assessment to say, what are the things that they would need to know?
Correct.
And what are the specialized items that we need to make sure we have lined up 1, 2, 3 months out because of the length of time to get this done. This really drives your strategy as an organization to say, all right, throughout the year, we know we're really busy in the summer, but if we could front load some training to take place in the winter seasons, this would really give us line of sight to shift our training compliance dates so we can do it in our slower times of the year, rather than try to get people, training when you're literally running and you're spread so thin. You're almost asking for people to be out of compliance. You're asking for people to be tempted and take a risk because they're doing it in their peak season. This provides much more than just a compliance snapshot.
You're right. And you talked about the groups, the ability to set up groups and profiles. the really great thing about the platform is if you hire a mechanical person, electrical person, to your point about those type of job profiles, the system easily assigns what their 5, 10, 15, whatever amount of items that they have, and they know instantly what they need to be trained on. So the system makes it easy for you. So if you're an admin person, you don't have to remember the 14 things that an electrician needed, or that mechanical person or a welder needed. It's already in the system. You assign them a group, you assign them a profile. And the other comment you made, I think, is so important, is that if you're running a service organization, you need to be proactively looking at who you can send on a job site. So this platform now, you can easily see who's qualified, like a confined space. If you've got to send somebody out who's a welder, but it also involves a confined space, what welders do you have that are fully certified, but also have specific types of confined space training? And that also means, do you have to train them specifically for that site? The platform allows you to figure that out really quickly, is can you send somebody out there? Another thing that people are not even thinking about is simple things like badges. Mm-hmm. We have a very large electrical contractor down in the Washington, D.C. area that tracks thousands of badges. They do a lot of work for all the federal agencies. And years ago, your badge would last 6 months. Mm-hmm. Well, in today's heightened security, your badges are expiring every 30 days. So imagine an electrician who has access to 20 different buildings. He has 20 different badges. So that person, so it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you're dispatching him, you need to know if his badge is expired, he can get into that building. And this contractor specifically targeted that as the first thing that they needed to get under control, because they were dispatching people to all these different buildings in the middle of the night and they had no idea if they could get into the buildings. So this system quickly allowed them to get control of that. The customer satisfaction issues went away. They were making more money. I mean, they weren't sending people out, wasting their time, paying them overtime. And again, it's not the electrician's fault that he didn't remember this badge expired. It's the company's fault, to your point. That electrician's carrying that badge on behalf of that company. So our clients use this in various different ways to track things. So a badge is not your license, but a badge is as important to practice your trade, because you got to get into the building to be able to practice your trade.
There's so many aspects of this where, as simple as the idea of sending the right person to the right job at the right time, qualified, right?
Pretty simple concept.
It seems like a pretty simple concept, but when we talk about contractors, there's so many moving pieces and parts and variability. And it's easy to go, well, I'm not a contractor, so I don't have to live in this world. But every single employer has certain things that they're going to have to track, and especially with the latest news on the mandate for the COVID vaccinations, or managing the testing requirements. I have to imagine there's application here.
Yeah, the COVID testing, we all realized that a couple of weeks ago that our president announced it's just going to be mandatory testing, but we've had clients for 6 months now that have been dealing with this. I mean, there's many customers, many general contractors that have just demanded mandatory vaccinations or mandatory weekly testing. So we added that to our platform more than 6 months ago. So we have many of our clients now tracking the vaccinations or tracking the testings. And by the way, it's pretty simple. Either you're vaccinated or you're not. You're fully vaccinated with both shots, or in Johnson & Johnson case, the one shot, or you're not. In which if you're not, for medical exemptions or religious exemptions, you still have to be tested every week. So how do you track that? And that's very difficult, and our platform's been able to help all of our clients to be able to handle that very effectively.
And it almost seems like a good place to start. I mean, every employer needs to be doing some sort of management of their employee qualifications, certifications. No one is exempt from qualifying their employees. So this has to be that logical starting point, because I know every day I'm dealing with an onslaught of questions that are coming in from clients saying, how do I comply? Do I need to comply? What do I do here? And they're looking for guidance in this because they have people all over the country, or they're questioning, how do I get my arms wrapped around the influx of information? So how would TMX manage the testing aspect? It's easy to say, yes, I'm vaccinated or I'm not vaccinated, and kind of get that, I'm in this group or I'm in this group. But for the folks that haven't had the vaccination and we have to bring on this testing weekly requirement now, how is TMX softening that blow?
We've seen our customers handling it a couple of different ways. Let me talk about the larger project ways. Some of the bigger general contractors working on very large projects actually are bringing testing labs on site to their construction facilities or within a block away to be able to test their employees, and they have a set date. So like on a Wednesday, we'll pick that date. If you're not fully vaccinated, you must be in that trailer at some point during your 8-hour shift or before or afterwards being retested. And then that lab sends us the results electronically by Friday, or they send it to us in a spreadsheet, however they do. A lot of them integrate into our platform. So now we know, so by Monday morning, you know what workers can be back on the site because they've tested negative. If they've tested positive, you would then have to follow the quarantine provisions of that contractor or that client. Some of them are requiring 10 days, some are 14 days. You just have to follow that. And then we have other clients that are smaller that don't have the luxury of having a lab someplace on site every Wednesday. So they're sending all their employees they're typically picking a testing center, or they're picking one methodology, either home testing or CVS or Quest, and they're setting up a relationship with them so they know they can trust that. But we even have clients that are trusting their employees to test themselves at home weekly. And what they do is they literally take their driver's license, they take the test results, they take a picture of that, and they upload it every Friday to the system so they know they've tested that week and they can show up on Monday. There's a lot of different ways to do it, from the scale of the project that you're on to how big or small you are. But it's a real world problem that all of our clients are solving with our platform.
Well, and it spreads the workload because the platform, creates this centralization of the information. So it's not just I got to bring in my piece of paper, which naturally I'm probably going to forget a few days in a row, give it to HR, and then HR has to, more or less get a batch of these ready, and then they're going to upload them, and then they got to sort through and determine, all right, well, who's ready? That's a lengthy process, and it's riddled with opportunities for a process breakdown, where we're removing all of the inner workings where the employee has the ability to upload this in real time. And it's establishing accountability where accountability should be at the employee level of, this is your requirement. You handle your part, and we'll take care of the clearances on the back end.
And I don't know, Joe, I don't think we've met one company yet that has this person that their full-time job is this compliance tracking. It's typically one of the 13 jobs that some poor person has, or it's one of the 13 things that 30 people have. And no one has a true accountability for it. So what this platform does is allow various people to participate in the process and create the accountability back on the employee and the people that own that person to be on a job site, to be in their working environment, to say you can or cannot be here. So it truly does disperse the accountability and the process. And to your point, at the end of the day, it empowers the employee to participate in it like they should be.
And as a safety and risk manager, someone who lived that life, actually spent time in the field, this was a gray area. Is this HR's responsibility? Is it safety's responsibility? We did some of the training, some of it was third party, but it really all ended up in the employee personnel file, and oftentimes it never ended up in the personnel file because you were relying on information to flow in that never flowed. This would more or less be able to easily determine the folks that are red, there's something going on. They either didn't upload their own information, they're out of compliance on the training, but regardless, they're not working today until we get this buttoned up.
True. And the other great thing about the platform is it allows the employee or the company to be able to store the documents online. You just talked about filing cabinets. I can't tell you how many clients that we show up to that have boxes and boxes and boxes of paper, or binders and binders, have no idea what this stuff is. All of this information is stored in our secure cloud environment. And the other thing great about it is that if your client wants to see the vaccination cards of the 10 employees at the job site, we've got this thing called the share button built into the platform. So either the employee themselves can share their information, or a manager or someone who's governing the process can easily log into their platform, grab the employees that they need, grab the compliance items they need to share, send it to an email address, and now that person securely has got a link to all the documents. So there's all your vaccination cards right there. So you don't have to scan things, you don't have to pull things out of filing cabinets. It's a 2-second process to be able to share the information. That's what really cuts the burden down.
That's really interesting, because oftentimes the information's there, but getting it to the necessary parties, I can't tell you how many times we've got a call from a contractor that says, I'm at the gate, they won't let me in, the certificate of insurance that they has expired, we need to get another one. And that person doesn't have the resources to do it. So you're saying there's ways on the platform that we could share other documents beyond just
Absolutely.
Training records.
If you think about your business licenses, your certificate of insurances, all of that information that someday needs to be shared with a client for whatever reasons. And you're right, many clients check your insurance levels when you walk through the
Very
gates.
much.
And if they don't have the date information, you're not walking through the gate. Well, now that employee, or one quick phone call back to the administrator, they quickly share that information, no looking it up anywhere. They know exactly where the certificate of insurance are, and now the client has it in a matter of minutes versus hours, or you're sending your employee back home. We can thank one of our clients in Florida for our share button. Many years ago, they called and said, we need a share button. We're like, what's a share button? And they explained exactly this business problem, and within weeks we built them a share button, and all of our clients use it now. It's one of the more popular features on the site, compliments of one big contractor in Florida who's dealing with a lot of very high-end high-rises, and you cannot walk into those high-rises without your insurances being up to date, because the liability is too great for those high rises.
It is. And liability is one of those things that no employer escapes, regardless of the industry you're in. And when as we were preparing for the conversation, and I continue to think, okay, if you don't fall into the contracting bucket, I don't want people to lose the notion that this is an effective platform for them, because I find that most businesses have, in some form or fashion, employees driving on company-related business, right? They're out there, it's not a company vehicle, it's their own, and the question always comes back, at least from someone who lives in this world of doom and gloom and risk, when was their license checked last time? Do they have a valid license? Is their insurance current? Do they even purchase insurance? Because it's going to default back onto the employer. Even though it's their vehicle, their insurance, we are the ones who have the deeper pockets in their own company business. So it sounds like there's a means that we could even track driver's licenses, personal insurance cards for all these people who are out there driving on company business and non-company autos. That's a big area of not only compliance, but liability. If I'm driving out there and my license is expired, or I'm not even operating with insurance, that really puts an employer in a position of negligence.
It does, and in fact, our platform does track that. In fact, it tracks it two different ways. To your point, employees driving their own vehicle or a company vehicle, either one, they have to upload their driver's licenses. And typically, employers are demanding that you upload your insurance certificate every 3 months or 6 months, never longer than 6 months, because that way you're making sure they haven't canceled it. So it's at least limiting your exposure. But again, you also have employees driving your own equipment, and that is its own liability and exposure to it as well. And oh, by the way, when they're driving that equipment, they need to have their insurance information and things like that with them. You can have that in the platform versus losing it in their glove box.
Very much.
So you can assign all these compliance items literally to a vehicle that's then assigned to a person. So when that person has that vehicle, they have all that information related to that vehicle with them. Or if it's their personal vehicle, you can do the same thing. So it tracks it both ways.
So it's easy to say that if an employer wanted to begin to track anything with an expiration date, physical equipment, property, employee certifications, hire dates, vehicle inspections, anything along these lines. Employee agreements. Anything that there's an expiration date on can essentially be tracked in the system.
Correct. We basically say we're an expiration management company. We provide risk management solutions, but through expiration management. We're tracking all that. We've talked a lot about contractors, but if you think about schools, schools have hundreds of volunteers, coaches, people helping around kids. We have many schools using our platform as well, because they have to track all of these people. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, just one example, requires anywhere from 7 to 11 different types of compliance items per volunteer. And that's background checks, fingerprinting, sex offender research. All of that is baked into this. So you have schools, you have churches, you have residential home care. We have clients that are, to your point, back to driving vehicles. But now you have nurses or physician's assistants, or you have physical therapists now traveling to sites of people's homes. They have to have other types of background checks. So there's every type. We spent a lot of time on contractors, but really every industry has their nuances of how to track this information. We haven't found an industry that's immune to being able to comply and be able to track these type of expirations.
And what I've really enjoyed about the platform, Pat, was I had a client that had a need. They weren't really a trucking company, but they had commercial vehicle drivers. And this was an awareness point for them. We start working with them and they go, well, we're not a DOT company. And it's like, yeah, you are. You have an MC number, and you are over the weight limits, and you have to have people that have commercial driver's licenses, but they weren't tracking it. And that went into a whole other host of things, their road test and their driver's license and their medical examination and a lot of requirements where you guys weren't necessarily claiming, hey, we'll manage DOT files. The system worked, and effectively we manage their DOT files now for a year plus. And what I've really liked is it doesn't seem that there's boundaries on the system to say, well, we can't do that. If it has an expiration, you can track it, soup to nuts, start to finish, through that life cycle.
Correct. And that's been the beauty of being able to offer this to all these different types of companies, is that really If you have tracked things that expire, we can help you do that, and we can get you off the ground very quickly. You don't ever want to boil the ocean with this. And the other key thing that I should add we haven't talked about is that this system does not replace, in any sense, any software that you have today. It's a bolt-on to your HR system, it's a bolt-on to your payroll system, to your learning management system. A lot of times people use our system as a front end to their learning management systems. These companies have many learning management systems, and they don't know some training's over here, some training's over here in these different systems. Well, they have no way to track it, so they use our platform as the front end to all those learning management systems. So we really become the single source of truth for that information. So really a bolt-on platform. So you don't have to worry about, gee, we're doing what your payroll system does. Payroll companies don't do this. HRS systems don't do this. Even the most expensive ones don't have this type of capability into it. It just seems to be, back to my 1994 experience, it seems like the last 30 years, this has been widely ignored by the marketplace, and this is why we created the company, to be able to solve this problem.
And I think that a lot of what's driven this is people wait for that OSHA citation to hit, and they go, oh man, I got my hand slapped, I better do something to fix it so I don't get another slap on the hand. But most of the time, those OSHA citations are drops in the bucket compared to what the real numbers are when we look at a liability situation. I mean, there isn't going to be an OSHA citation that comes back to an employer who has an employee driving with an expired license. I mean, that's just not something that falls under the OSHA requirements. Sure, they can loop in bigger things under what they call a general duty violation, but most of the time that's going to be a court of public law, in the sense of, are you a good employer, and what's going to drive perception and opinion on that. But ultimately it's going to come down to a jury, and they're going to come and they're going to say, did you do enough as an employer? Did you pass the sniff test to make sure that those people did everything that they were supposed to do? So if you have no system in place to track driver's licenses or vehicle insurance cards, and then something like this happens, open up the checkbook. Mm-hmm. And we're hearing the term nuclear verdicts more and more, especially in the auto side, where these employers are getting left with the bag, and it's blown through all their auto limits, and they're getting $8, $9, $12 million verdicts levied against them for negligence. Negligent entrustment, where they let the person stay working. Negligent retention, they kept them on. And it's a scary place to be as an employer, and you can't stick your head in the sand and say, well, I couldn't manage it. It was just too much or too broad or too comprehensive. There's a solution here.
You're right, and we've seen, I'd probably say half of our clients come to us because they've had a problem. The other half are trying to be proactive and really not get into that. But what we are seeing are these nuclear verdicts, and they are costing employers a tremendous amount of money. The ability to get to negligence today seems to be a lot easier than it was 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. Negligence now carries much heavier financial settlements, and to your point, it's blown by the coverage. The employer's out of pocket for the money. Mm-hmm. And especially when you have an employer testifying saying, yeah, I know that employee 3 years ago had a problem with their driver's license, but we got it renewed. Well, what did you do to make sure that it's still up to date? Nothing. That's the fine line now that people are crossing into. So, using a system like ours to easily track that information. Employees can always still lie. We're never going to get rid of mm-hmm. deceit, especially in our drug testing. We do a lot of drug testing, track that in our platform, and employees have been trying to get around that forever. So you can't prevent an employee trying to do misbehave, but at the end of the day, you can prove that you've done everything as a company to make sure that they were compliant, which I even think in working with Seubert especially, you've been able to save your company's money even on their underwriting costs, because you're proving to them, you're basically putting them on a silver platter mm-hmm. and saying, look at what they're doing for the risk mitigation strategies. They deserve a better premium than somebody who's doing nothing. So I think it even goes as far as helping them with their premiums.
I mean, there's been time and time again, Pat, where new businesses coming in, we're trying to, take a new client out into the marketplace and sell them as a good risk, right? And underwriters are going to base your price on two things: what they know about you, and then what they don't know about you, right? And what they know about you are all the things, your class code and your payroll and all these things that are very predictable. But that what they don't know about you part is the big one, right? And if they don't have a comfort level with you, the pricing might be competitive, it might be what the market dictates, but it's not going to be great. Whenever we flip that script and we can come to them and say, let me show you how they're managing, by and large, one of their biggest liabilities, and lay out a comprehensive approach to OSHA compliance, auto liability compliance, certifications, the whole deal. it's going to take a much different turn. The conversation is going to go more on what they can do and how they can find it, and that transparency is really going to max out some of these areas. I mean, workers' compensation is a good example. There's almost up to 25% underwriting discretion, right? There's some things you just can't change, but there's other things like your vibrant safety program and the systems that you have in place and the culture that's out there that are subjective, but it's really our job to help sell that to an underwriter. And when I have a client that's on a platform like TMX, it's an easy conversation. I mean, just the dashboard alone to be able to show them, see all these greens? Mm-hmm. That this is a good company. Mm-hmm. You know, conversely, let me show you some reds. And I actually see the reds as a benefit too, because it's line of sight. I want to know who my people are that shouldn't be on the job as much as I want to know who my people are that should be on that job, because we have to manage that part of the process. And you know, when we look at some of these obligations that are on the employer, more and more the onus is going back to them. As technology has crept up into our world, it's creating accountability that employers may not have realized was expected or there, because technology will allow us to see all these different things. And a common claims defense that keeps coming back is if not for. So if not for that employee being on site, the building doesn't flood. If not for those maintenance contractors coming on site, the tandem mill doesn't burn to the ground. If not for that employee driving without an expired license, at your permission of the company, we don't have a multifamily, vehicle accident and a $12 million verdict. Mm-hmm. So it really comes back to, you can't plead ignorance. You can't say, well, I didn't know, or I didn't have time, or I'm just too darn busy. Not only the expectation, but the regulation is saying you better do this.
Mm-hmm. And I think your point about red, I mean, a lot of our clients, we teach our clients that red is not bad. Red means you're managing.
Yeah.
Right? Red, you're going to have red a lot, and red means what am I doing about it, right? And your insurance company doesn't, you expect not to have red. They know it. The question is, what are your processes in place? And that's the key thing that you're helping the underwriters understand is, here's the processes that the company has in place when things are red or when things are coming up on yellow. And if you have a lot of people in yellow that need the same type of training, it allows you to proactively plan training so much more effectively than just doing this ad hoc training for 24 hours to go, which most clients are doing just to make sure people are compliant.
Mm-hmm. And these spot treatments are just that. Hey, they're out of compliance. Let me just give you a quick down and dirty one. And I was guilty of it too. I worked in the industry across, it wasn't just contracting and construction. It was logistics. It was, food and beverage. And there's just times where you got to get it done. And in the absence of a real understanding of, how big the organization is and where I need to spend my time, I think a lot of safety and risk professionals are looking for the fires and seeing where the smoke is, and then they go, oh, this is where I need to spend my time, where this now proactively allows you to have that transparency to say, okay, we have a big project coming up in 3 months. It's going to take a while. We got to get our gloves tested. We got to make sure all of our hot sticks are good if I'm an electrical contractor. Yeah. I'm using this type of piping, and we're going to use that tool that needs to function and cycle a certain way. We better do quality control training for these things. It just allows you to anticipate what's coming down the pike instead of react. And that's a great place to be in, is planning and approaching a problem than getting smacked in the face with it and trying to react.
I agree. And again, we keep talking about contractors, but if you think about it, think about manufacturers, think about schools, think about churches, all of this. If you've got upcoming, like we have a lot of schools that every fall have to retrain and recertify every one of their coaches. So they have to go through different types of coaches training. They have to make sure their CPR training's up to date, their concussion management protocols are up to date. So it really impacts every industry to proactively think about this differently, and it allows you to have the tools. We have several schools that this said it is just massively taken down their overhead and ability to plan this stuff out more effectively.
Wow. So it seems like if I'm planning my 2022 and I'm looking for key initiatives to jump on, not that we wait for 22, but if I'm really thinking about what can I do as an employer that's going to help me from a risk management standpoint, control my insurance costs, keep me out of the hot seat with OSHA, but more importantly, give my employees an actual chance to do their jobs effectively and successfully and keep them out of harm's way, this really should be at the top of every employer's list, not just a contractor.
It should be. And the way our pricing of our solution was developed is around how many active employees you have. So you don't have to spend all this money up front with this licensing fee and then what do I do with this, right? It's very much as pay as you go. And what we tell people is start now, start small. Do something that's manageable, get used to the platform, get comfortable with it, really see the value in it. and then go from there. I mean, in the last 2 years, we've not lost one client. Every one of our clients have renewed, and we're growing clients by the day, to tell you the power of start small and then take it and then grow it, right? We don't want, like, unfortunately, when you put a lot of IT systems in, Joe, you've seen it in your career, I've seen it forever. I mean, they have a lot of these massive implementations, and it takes months and months and just countless dollars to be able to implement it. And sometimes they don't go well. Sometimes they don't even get installed. This is different. You bolt this software onto whatever you have in your company today, and you start small and you build with it. And within 6 months, you'll see most of our clients are 2/3 of the way through deploying, and within 9 months they're done. But they don't even know it because it's gone very gradually, and it's not been too much of a burden on them, and they go after the biggest pain points. And we've actually had, like the electrical contractor I mentioned down in Baltimore, they actually took a bigger chunk of the apple first. They had to get these badges under control. It was costing them too much money, they were having too many customer issues, and within 3 months they had thousands of badges and hundreds of employees under control. And then they backed up and said, okay, now what's important? And then they went and did other things following it. So again, it's whatever your problems are and whatever your pain points are, our implementation team, we have what we call a rapid implementation process that we look at how to get you up and running in days, in a few weeks, not months. I mean, the goal is that you start using this platform within days of you signing with us. I mean, that's how fast we want this to be, because that's the value beginning for you, that you're now getting this process under control, and now you can start to show the broader company, look how we're doing this, look how simple this is, and look at the burden it's taking off of everybody in the company to have more control and accountability that you have.
So with the platform, Pat, with the compliance items, if I go head first into this and I say I want to really track everything that I can possibly track under the sun for my active employees. If I have people that are seasonal, I can just shut them off. I'm not getting billed for those. The records maintain, and then when they come back into the system, I can just turn them back on. Correct?
It's called disable. You can disable an employee at any time. And really what that allows you to do is to have seasonal workers, or especially union halls. We've talked a lot about that. When you're bringing people in and out of the halls all the time, especially if you do a lot of work in a specific city, you're going to see that same employee all the time. So you can bring them in and out and know exactly. So when you re-enable them, you're going to see exactly the types of training that you gave them, that they were certified in your company. And you make a decision then, what do you want to retrain them on? What new trainings do they need? And by the way, it turns red, green, yellow as soon as you enable them. So you'll know immediately of that bulk of people that you just brought back, you'll know within a second who's out of compliant, who's not. And you instantly can target the compliance issues right there. Versus trying to imagine bringing back 30 people or 200 people manually and pulling their files and trying to figure out from a spreadsheet what they were trained on.
I've done that, and it was hell. And on top of that, it was riddled with error. Right? One date here, one date there. Sometimes certifications are from a third party, sometimes they're first party, and they have different implications. So it seems like, if I'm budgeting and I'm looking at it from an employer aspect, there's really no limit to what I can track in this. And where other systems, when I want to add or expand, I'm negatively rewarded with that, with a bigger bill. It seems like I'm paying for the employee, and then the number of compliance items I track for that individual organization is infinite.
It is infinite. You only pay for the employees that are active. We charge a monthly fee per employee per month that are active in the platform. It's very simple. And they could have 10 compliance items, they could have 1,000 compliance items per employee. It's independent. It doesn't know how much storage you use. There's no other additional fees. How many admins you have. It's a one fee process.
So when you make that statement, a single source of truth, this really becomes the sole aspect of an organization to be able to say, I know exactly what my employees are capable of doing, are qualified to do, and if they're even should be working today across the organization.
Absolutely. And you can break it down across the organization, break it down by group, by project site. That's the key thing about it. You can have whatever view you want. You can have one person that looks across the entire company, and then you can have the respected people looking about their responsibilities and accountability. So there's many ways you can set this up to drive that level of accountability, and more importantly, visibility of that single source of truth.
It's impressive. That's impressive. So I see we have a couple questions coming in, and I know that there's obviously many aspects of this. So as we sorted through some of these questions, Pat, one of the first ones that has come up multiple times is, in a typical implementation, if I'm starting with the COVID testing and the screening, what would I realistically be able to expect from point of contact with TMX to when I was actually able to begin tracking and managing the data that's in the system?
Let's just pick a sample company size, just for simplicity. Let's say you have 300 employees, and you sign the contract with TMX, and you just want to track your COVID vaccinations or your COVID test. One thing I haven't mentioned is that we have a library pre-populated with all of these compliance items. So you're not making up these definitions. So we already have all the COVID information. Our onboarding team, implementation team would work with you to set up the feed to get for the 300 employees. And then we would work with you to set the process up of how your employees are going to upload their vaccination cards. Some people already may have copies of them digitally, some may not. So we're completely flexible based upon where you are as a company. So we could literally have you and your 300 employees up and running in a few days, or maybe 2 weeks, based upon where you're at with all the data collection, things like that. Most clients want to start putting the burden of uploading this information on their employees. And I know everyone's going to say, well, wait a minute, my group is not very technology savvy. Imagine working with all the contractors that we work with. There's various age groups with contractors, from young, very tech-enabled, contractors to much older contractors who are not technology savvy. They're all using the platform. Mm-hmm. We've got the ability that they can get onto the platform. It's a few clicks to upload information. It's pretty bulletproof of how they can get the information there. And then you, as the employer, figure out how you want to. There's various ways you can approve or disapprove the information they've uploaded. Because we've had people upload pictures of dogs, literally. You can imagine you take a photo from your camera, and the previous photo you took an hour earlier was of your dog, right? And you upload the wrong photo. Well, whoever you have set up as an approver on our platform could be able to look at that photo, make sure it's a legitimate vaccination card or the picture of Fido, your dog. Mm-hmm. They can reject it back and say upload the appropriate picture, or they can approve it. And again, if we already have electronic feeds set up with carriers, then that's automatically fed into it. But it's a matter of days to a few weeks that you're up and running with hundreds of employees.
I remember in past lives where we were trying to bring, training data or something into an LMS, it was often months. It was months and months. And even then it was limited on what you could actually pull. Now, in the system, is there reports that you can run as well, Pat, that, at any point in time, an administrator could be, demonstrate to a customer, I want to show you a compliance snapshot, or I want to show you a report, average number of days, certifications lapse, things like that?
Absolutely. There's a myriad of reports in the platform, starting with running a report of all of your employees and looking at their statuses, right? So you know exactly who's red, green, yellow, the days away from expiration. So we actually have a lot of employers who look at that on a weekly basis on what's upcoming expirations, and that's the people that are planning the training. So if they look at it and say, wow, we have 30 people in the next 3 weeks that CPR training is going to expire, then we need to schedule 1 or 2 classes, invite all those 30 people in, versus trying to have 30 employees go find a CPR class. So it's it's based on the size of your organization. If you only have 3 people that have a CPR class, then they're probably going to seek their own class. But many employers develop the classes in-house or have people come in to make the process much more smoothly.
And that's refreshing, because a lot of EHS platforms and people management platforms were really geared for these large organizations. And when you think about especially Western Pennsylvania, we're not all Fortune 100 companies. There's a lot of 100 to 150 employee companies. They're family owned, and to go out there and buy an off-the-shelf system that doesn't really hit the mark is expensive, and it leaves a bad taste in their mouth because they're still struggling to manage the compliance. So that approach that makes this scalable for the employer, it takes the excuses out of the mix. I've heard too many times, or I'm too small, or I'm too big, or nothing really fits my model. This seems to be able to live and breathe with the organization much differently than any other compliance management system I've seen.
It does. Our system allows an employer with 20 employees or 5,000 employees to easily use the platform. I mean, there is really you're not disadvantaged or advantaged by being 20 employees or 5,000 employees. The platform works the same. How you're going to manage 5,000 employees is going to be governed materially different than you have 20 or 100 employees. I think the average size of employer in our platform is probably in a few hundreds employees. So, but there's no reason why, if you have 5,000 employees, you can't effectively use it, because you're going to set it up differently. And as many times you have 5,000 employees, it's across many divisions, many different buildings, many different things. And what you're going to do is you're going to onboard, implement those people differently, right? And you're going to manage them differently. Mm-hmm. We have clients that own materially different, distinct businesses. They may have 2,000 employees, but 1,000 in one type of business and 1,000 in another. They manage them as completely different types of businesses, so they don't even know they're together. So you can manage it very variously, very differently.
And eliminates the excuses of why you can't. plain and simple. Well, they belong to this division, or sometimes we swap employees, because I find that as I've investigated incidents, especially when an employee was doing something that they shouldn't have been doing, it's a non-routine task, it was a one-off, I just needed him shortly, or hey, Joe's on vacation, so we had to bring you in for this. That's becoming, by and large, one of the biggest obstacles that employers have, is with a shortage of skilled labor, they're in these positions where they're just getting by. They got to do what they got to do, and the excuses continue to come up. Well, I'm limited to the people that I have. What do you want me to do?
Right.
I just want to make sure that the people that you have are trained, they're qualified, it's current, and you're deploying them as you should be. Because we find that employers change for one of two reasons, right? Something bad happens, their hand gets forced by regulatory, legal, some type of pressure from the outside, and then they're doing it on somebody else's budget, somebody else's timetable, right? And certainly somebody else's agenda. Where conversely, if we can go, it's arguable that I'm going to have people in a precarious situation at some point in time. And I think every employer can say that. Yeah. I am going to have my employees get into situations at some point in time that I need to make sure they are good to go. If we're not doing that, we are just rolling the dice consistently each and every time. And more, we're finding that excuse to say, well, I didn't know, just isn't working anymore. We can't claim ignorance. We can't claim, time, capacity, any of these things. With technology, we know there's a way to see this stuff. And it's really pushing employers to that edge to take initiative and do this on their own.
Something we didn't talk about, I should have mentioned earlier, is that a lot of our clients now are using this to manage their subcontractors. Because back to your point about, we were talking about contractors getting on site to their clients, you have to flip it around. You have employers now that need to understand their subcontractors are on their facilities. And that's the other thing, is our platform can allow you to build a hierarchy in the system. So you'll know by the icons and how the platform is set up, is this your employee or is this a subcontractor's employee that's out of compliance? So if you see red and it's a different type of icon, you would know then it's a subcontractor's employee that's on your facility. So that's now you're working with your subcontractors and saying, why do you have people on our site that are not qualified? Because in today's world, we're using so many companies now using third-party resources. They're not just their employees anymore. So now how do you extend that umbrella out to them to say, you have to follow the same compliance items, even though you're not an employee, you're 1099, whatever the terminology you want to use. How do you do that? Mm-hmm. And our platform allows you to track down into your subcontractors or your 1099s.
And again, that same excuse of employers saying, well, I didn't know, we are seeing it going upstream to the people who are bringing contractors or third parties on site, and it's no longer acceptable to say, well, we didn't know that those people weren't certified. They're looking for the transparency for them as well. So right. It sounds like whether you can't force your subcontractors to get onto the platform, but you can provide a means to have visibility of their qualifications and hold them accountable even when they're not taking that step for themselves.
Correct.
That's closing a very important gap.
It is, and it really now you're going well beyond just your employee base. Now you're covering everybody, which you're ultimately liable for. If an accident happens, as the employer that had that subcontractor, you're getting sued. It's that simple. They're going to sue everybody, and you're going to be liable for it. So mm-hmm. What did you do to make sure that subcontractor, that 1099, was qualified to be doing that job?
And again, it goes back to if not for, right? If that contractor wasn't on the job, would we have the same situation, right? And a lot of it is, well, they were the low bid. Okay. Well, if they're the low bid and they're not qualified, they're not the bid at all, and we should be moving on from them. So last question, Pat, and it's really playing into more on the COVID aspect, right? What's a reasonable cost for an employer where at that 100 employee threshold that now needs to comply with the weekly testing or vaccination record check? What's an expectation of what they might spend to get up and running on the platform?
Our list price per employee per month is $3. So if you have 100 employees, it's going to cost you $300 a month to track those employees, which to most companies is a rounding error. It's very inexpensive, right? And there's a small implementation fee that we charge as well based upon how you want to manage your implementation, but that's a one-time fee. But you're only going to be paying $300 a month, so if it's $3,600 a year, is it worth $3,600 a year for 300 employees to understand that they're completely compliant and know your exposure of your employee base?
And I want to, again, qualify this. So that $300 a year, while it's satisfying the COVID aspect, you can also simultaneously do everything else in your organization to get it done. So let's do a quick return on investment. The basic fine for being out of compliance on the vaccination requirements, should enforcement come to light, which they're still figuring out how that's going to work, but should that come to light, is somewhere in between $13,000 to $14,000 per infraction.
Per infraction.
So
correct.
it's very easy to say that this could be a couple thousand times return on investment in the first week of non-compliance by just taking the step and getting one part of your organization on this.
Correct. We literally have clients calling us in the last several months, and again, our phone started ringing off the hook absolutely within hours of Biden's speech about the mandates. A lot of companies that were thinking about doing this just decided we got to do it now. Mm-hmm. They had no choice, right? And you're right. That same $300 is either 2 compliance items, either you're vaccinated or you're testing, or you can add 50 more compliance items per person. Again, it's the same price, there's no additional fees. It's about how you want to take the platform and use it to be most effective for your organization. And again, it's just a growth of how you want to effectively use it. And other than the one-time implementation fee, that's all the additional fees you'll pay.
Wow. Well, I think it's very risky business to not be operating with this platform. I mean, I've been out of the field aspect of this. I still visit clients. I'm still working through this, but the day-to-day management of it, and I've sat here since I've had exposure to it and wondered how many situations could I have prevented? How many conversations could I have had with people that would have driven further engagement, that changed the culture of the organization simply because we knew what we didn't know at that point in time. And we made a lot of really, really dangerous assumptions. And assumptions, especially when we're talking about employee safety and risk, are dangerous. And this provides you with real-time decision making, not assumptions, but decision making. And I can't stress the importance of that for employers, is to be operating in that source of truth. And without it, it's guesswork.
It is. And I would add the word accountability too. Now you can empower the right people in the organization to be accountable for this versus some poor admin or admins having this as one of their 13 assignments for that day and it never gets done. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, at the end of the day, when you're in court, someone's going to ask you who in your organization was accountable for this. That's a tough question to answer when you had it spread across all these different people and it wasn't their job. Now you can have various people accountable for the right groups and have the right level of responsibility.
And a means of holding them to those standards in real time, because again, most of it's reactive. Oh, well, they didn't have the certification and we slap on the wrist in hindsight. This needs to get flipped towards this proactive, doing this spot check before someone leaves, before someone goes out to a job site, because it's going to hit your productivity. It's definitely going to hit quality when an employee's frustrated because they weren't able to get in the gate and they waited for 3 hours. It's definitely going to hit your customer reputational aspect. And insurance is one of those things where employers always want to know, if I do this, am I going to save money? If I do this, tell me how it's going to carve out costs on my insurance program. And you pay for your claims. So everything that we can do that's going to keep you out of the realm of having claims, you're going to reap a reward on the insurance side of it. But more importantly, getting the system up and running, getting some data flowing through it and managing by it, and then having a conversation with an underwriter is going to be a very different insurance renewal than most employers are used to, because they're coming to the table with the solution. Where in the past, that hasn't been the case.
Absolutely, and we've seen some of your clients even give your team access, so you guys can help work with them to make sure they're staying compliant. So this is a great tool to help you and your team work with your clients to mitigate that risk, to go after reducing underwriting costs.
Well, Pat, thank you for taking some time today to join us and walk through the platform. It seems like this is an all-employer issue. It doesn't just apply to contractors. Anything with an expiration date, anything you want to maintain, some line of sight on certification, expiration, and should they even be going out and visiting with your customers, you can do it in one system.
Correct.
Well, that's easy enough. Employers, clients, friends, new faces, please reach out, talk to Pat at TMX Compliance, and start getting line of sight on these accountability issues today.